challenge to existing conditions of social and political segregation. Most whites who abhor these injustices choose to remain silent. A few, like the members of the Black Sash, a women's protest organization, feel they have a duty to persist in their criticism, even though it has been called an exercise in futility. Jean Sinclair, president of the Black Sash, gives a clear picture of conditions she is protesting against.
The African is in the urban areas for one purpose only, and that is his labor. He is a temporary sojourner in the urban area, and no African may be in an urban area for more than 72 hours without permission. He can have no rights in an urban area, although until this year, when the Bantu Laws Amendment Act was passed, he had a right to live permanently in an urban area, though not to own his land. The Bantu Laws Amendment Act took away these rights. They have permission to work for a particular employer. When that contract is terminated, the African has to return to his home in the country and is not allowed to take further employment without permission. And so many of them find themselves endorsed out of the urban area. Migratory labor, it is usually temporary, but in South Africa it is a permanent part of our economic life.
The key instrument for white control of the Africans are the pass laws, which require everyone to carry reference documents or books known as passes. These men must have their passes checked to obtain work.
The reference book is a document which every African has to carry on his person. It has his photograph, his registration number, his tax receipts, and where he was born, the name of his chief, and where his book was issued in it, and also a service contract, that is a contract of labor with his employer.
It was the pass laws which triggered the infamous Sharpeville massacre, the turning point in South African destiny. On March 21st, 1960, a crowd of unarmed Africans assembled at the police station in the town of Sharpeville near Johannesburg to demonstrate against the hated pass laws. The police panicked and opened fire. 72 Africans were killed, 186 wounded. After Sharpeville, instead of easing the pressures which caused the explosion, the government took the opposite course. Sharpeville became an excuse to slap down African nationalism with the full force of legal powers and armed might. An emergency was declared, and the infamous 90-day law was enacted. This law made it possible for people to be held merely on suspicion. The original 90-day detention could be renewed indefinitely without a trial. Effective police-state measures have brought about relative tranquility, at least on the surface. The 90-day law has been temporarily suspended, although it can be brought back into force at a moment's notice. Alan Payton is pessimistic about conditions improving.
Well, the government claims quite openly and unashamedly that the reason why things are quieter is because the African people now accept the theories of separate development. That's not the reason at all. The reason is that African people have seen what power can do to men and women, destroy their lives.
The government tries to convince both South Africans and tourists that the Bantu can be happily occupied with tribal rites and dances. This kind of synthetic primitivism is the result. white moderates, who were formerly a dynamic element in political life, are today divided and indecisive in their opposition to the nationalist government's policy. Colin Eglin, himself a moderate, explains it this way.
Many South Africans, white South Africans, are unhappy at the apartheid policies which are being practiced in South Africa, and yet they see no real alternative to the practice of apartheid. They have, by and large, been conditioned to accept that if political control slips away from the white man into the hands of the black man in South Africa, then in fact there will be a period of oppression of the white man, and this will lead to both his economic and his political downfall.
Since Sharpeville, almost all meaningful communication between white and African groups has finally been severed. The African freedom movement is rooted in a long history of non-violence, but today this long tradition has been discredited and proved futile. Violence seems virtually inevitable. The government has outlawed the two major African political parties. The ANC, African National Congress, has been in existence for over 50 years. The PAC, Pan-Africanist Congress, founded in 1959, led the Sharpeville protest. Today, the leaders of both parties have been jailed, driven underground, or into exile. Chief Albert Luthuli is the patriarch of the freedom movement and president of the African National Congress. He has received the relatively light punishment of being banned, exiled to his rural homeland, because of his world fame as a Nobel Peace Prize winner. A lifelong champion of nonviolent protest, Luthuli's recent acceptance of violence aligns him with the black African consensus.
Violence under any circumstance is not a thing to be encouraged. It's not a thing to be encouraged. Now, if it comes, well, it's just like nations going to war. It's an unfortunate thing if nations have to go to war. But you can never anticipate and say, now, man, I'll work for war. Nobody works for violence. Nobody works for a war. But sometimes circumstances create that. And I can't predict circumstances and say, now, look, well, it's all right that this happens now. But in any case, I think as human beings, we must regret that we can't solve our differences and have to resort to violence and war and so on.
Raymond Kunene, who heads the London office of the African National Congress in exile, underscores the organization's firm position.
We are going to use all forms necessary to get our freedom in South Africa, whether it is violence against those who are violent against us, whether it is violence against the property that those who reinforce economically the government, whether it is any type of violence possible. Our aim is to get our freedom, and we are prepared to get our freedom at whatever sacrifice necessary.
Z.B. Molete, London representative of the Pan-Africanist Congress, speaks in even more specific terms.
The South African situation can only be resolved through bloodshed. That is, the African people taking arms against the oppressor, the foreign oppressor in the country. As for time, I think very soon.
The head of the Pan-Africanist Congress, Robert Sobukwe, has been jailed on Robben Island, the South African Bastille. The PAC represents the most militant of the younger generation who broke away from the African National Congress.
Robert Sobukwe, president of the PAC, was arrested on the 21st of March when the massacre at Sharpeville and Langa took place. He was subsequently charged and sentenced to 3 years, which term of imprisonment he served. After this, a special legislation was passed through Parliament to enable the government to keep him in jail indefinitely. And in the words of the Minister of Justice, Foster, when asked to release the man after serving his sentence, he said, "Not this one." And he continued that he would keep him this side of eternity.
Imprisonment on Robben Island has also been the fate of Nelson Mandela, giant among African patriots. Mandela succeeded Luthuli as active head of the African National Congress. After Sharpeville, he operated underground until he was caught in 1962 and tried for conspiracy and sabotage. His remarks addressed to the court at the end of his trial have provided a credo for fellow freedom fighters.
The ideological creed of the ANC is, and always has been, the creed of African nationalism. It is not the concept of African nationalism expressed in the cry, "Drive the white man into the sea." The African nationalism for which the ANC stands is the concept of freedom and fulfillment for the African people in their own land. South Africa is the richest country in Africa and could be one of the richest countries in the world. But it is a land of extremes and remarkable contrasts. The whites enjoy what may well be the highest standard of living in the world, whilst the Africans live in poverty and misery. The complaint of Africans, however, is not only that they are poor and the whites are rich, but that the laws which are made by the whites are designed to preserve this situation. Africans want a share in the whole of South Africa. They want security and a stake in society. Above all, we want equal political rights, because without them our disabilities will be permanent. I know this sounds revolutionary to the whites in this country, because the majority of voters will be Africans. This makes the white men fear democracy.
When Mandela's trial was ended, people gathered in front of the courthouse in Pretoria to await the verdict. The government radio broadcast the voice of the presiding judge, De Wet.
The crime of which the accused have been convicted, that is the main crime, the crime of conspiracy, is in essence one of high treason. The state has decided not to charge the crime in this form. Bearing this in mind and giving the matter very serious consideration, I have decided not to impose the supreme penalty, which in a case like this would usually be the proper penalty for the crime.
Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. Immediately afterwards, his wife, Winnie Mandela, was able to say a few words to encourage loyal friends and supporters.
My husband has been fighting for the liberation of the African people, for the working harmoniously of all the racial groups in this country. I shall never lose hope, and my people shall never lose hope. In fact, we expect that the work will go on.
While the work of African patriots goes on out of sight, whites, like Scott Pienaar, seem even more blindly confident in their ability to resolve the country's problems.
I think that if we were to be left reasonably alone for the next 5 to 10 years, we will manage to get some sort of solution. The difficulty at the moment is that the urban African and the urban African leaders are being made use of by outside influences. That's why we had, in the past few years, sabotage, murder. That was why we were forced to rule almost as if the country was in a state of emergency. And while these conditions obtain, it's very difficult to solve a problem of human relations. But we have indeed succeeded in bringing rest and order to the country.
The South African government's basic tactic in attacking black African leaders and their political movements has been to equate African nationalism with communism. Africans, including Luthuli, have bitterly rejected this claim.
Sufficient to say that I'm not a communist. But one must say this. Being one of the leaders in the liberation movement, we don't discriminate against people because of their own political outlook or certain leanings. We don't say that this man is a rightist, this one is a socialist, this one is a communist. We don't want in the liberation movement because we have one common purpose, and that is freedom.
From far removed from...
In reacting to the communist issue, journalist Nat Nakasa indicates the real and present danger of relating the Cold War to race war.
It is true, however, that all the troubles that the Africans have seen in South Africa have not come from communism. They have come from a country which professes to be living by standards of Christian Western civilization. Most Africans die without ever hearing about communism. All they hear about is the standards of Western Christian civilization, from which have accrued, as is well known right around the world, a lot of troubles, a lot of unpleasantnesses which South African Africans have suffered. This also does mean that those who lead movements in South Africa know that they're unlikely to get assistance from the Christian Western civilized world. Therefore, they seek assistance from elsewhere. Like anyone else who's in a spot, you seek assistance where you can get it.
The South African government advertises itself as a bulwark against communism and a stalwart friend of the West. The military might of South Africa could easily overpower the combined strength of the rest of the African continent. Since Sharpeville, military expenditures have increased 5-fold. While the United States, Britain, and other countries have stopped shipment of arms to South Africa, France and others have stepped in to fill the gap, and South Africa itself is becoming more and more self-sufficient in arms production. South Africa has all the resources and skills necessary to develop an atomic weapon. Its first nuclear reactor, designed for non-military purposes, went critical in the spring of 1965. It was built by Alice Chalmers, an American firm. At the same time, attracted by the possibility of enormous profits, extensive foreign investment has come in, over 90% of it from Europe and the United States. Our country's investment, second only to Great Britain, is increasing at the fastest rate. Many South Africans know the United States only through the corporate and brand names they see everywhere. And the South African government has shrewdly exploited the presence of United States business and businessmen as an endorsement of its policies by the American people. The role of American business has received special emphasis because of the weakness of our official policy. Dr. Carter believes that this is a problem Americans should face.
I feel we've got a particular concern in the United States because this is our problem too. We condemn South African racial policy, but most Africans in that country and outside say, what are we doing about it? And here it is perfectly clear that American businessmen are engaging in the South African economy. They're reaping rich profits. They're making very productive activities. We have a tracking station. We are intimately related to the prosperity which South Africa has, and we are gaining from it. And they say, what does your condemnation mean if you are, in this sense, bolstering the regime? And I think we have to take account of this position on their part. Whether it means that we should in some way dissociate ourselves with it, whether if crisis should occur in southern Africa, we would feel that we had to warn our businessmen that their participation might be contrary to American interest, remains to be seen and decided in Washington.
At the United Nations, the court of world opinion, Western nations are criticized particularly by representatives of Asian and African countries. Ambassador Akhtar Marouf of Guinea is chairman of the UN Special Committee on Apartheid.
In these halls of the United Nations, we have heard many eloquent speeches of abhorrence of apartheid and racial discrimination. We have also noted reports of actions by various governments which directly contradict their speeches. We are tired of the equivocations, contradictions, and hypocrisy which are the characteristic methods of certain great powers. We should look more closely at the interests which benefit from apartheid. Perhaps the main beneficiaries are not the South African whites. Perhaps they are only the gendarmes who are paid a commission to wield a whip against the Africans who toil and sweat so that the powerful interests in far-off capitals in the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and elsewhere.
United States Ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, has indeed eloquently deplored apartheid.
We all suffer from the disease of discrimination in various forms. And at least most of us recognize the disease for what it is, a disfiguring blight. The whole point...
The questions of sovereignty and the extent of moral responsibility beyond national boundaries are raised by Alan Paton, speaking from within his beloved South Africa.
I don't believe that one has domestic affairs which are of no concern to anybody else. I admit that sometimes interference is foolish. I admit that sometimes the knowledge of South Africa in outside countries is badly based. But it seems to me that members of the human race are entitled to watch with critical appraisal what happens in other countries. If only the countries of Europe had taken Germany more seriously in the 1930s, we might have been spared many of the troubles that plague the world today. It was a failure of the countries of Europe to know what was happening in Germany or to be indifferent to it. I don't believe that countries should be indifferent. I don't believe there's any such thing as an absolute sovereignty. And I'm sure that there'll be no peace for the human race either if nationalism goes mad.
For the United States, South Africa presents a difficult and perilous dilemma. There is the problem of the Cold War fusing with the struggle between the black and white races. South Africa has aligned herself with the Western world, of which we are the acknowledged leader. As long as we remain relatively aloof from the South African racial confrontation, we appear, especially in the eyes of the Afro-Asian world, to support the oppression by the white South African regime. Therefore, it does not appear to be in the national interest of the United States to have the friendship of the South African government if this friendship alienates us from a majority of the peoples of the world. But beyond the issue of self-interest, there is a moral question. Can any part of the world, indeed can the United States itself, part black and part white, remain outside the conflict as the races confront each other, as two nationalisms prepare to clash in South Africa? We believe this question calls for an early and positive American response.